Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Hammock, and I'm doing a post recording of a talk that I did at my church for a night of Spirited Talks. I'm a big fan of TED Talks, but I can't pretend to be an expert on this topic. The topic was creating versus consuming. I read an article that has made me think differently about the way that I choose to spend my free time. The article advocated creating more and consuming less. So less consuming, more creating. First of all, that struck me as an interesting dichotomy with consuming on one side and creating on the other. But more importantly, it was an entirely different way for me to evaluate my activities. Generally, I'm used to evaluating based on productivity or educational value, entertainment, necessity, etc. This was a whole new way to view how I was spending my time. Before we go too far, let's talk through some definitions. So think for a second about the most creative person that you know. When we think of creative people, we tend to think of people who are artistic or musical. I'd like to expand that fairly narrow definition. To me, creating has to do with making connections that are new. They don't have to be new to the world. They only have to be new to you. So it's more of active interacting rather than passively consuming. I don't have to be creating visual art or composing music or writing the next great American novel in order to be creative. In fact, I can be creative while cooking dinner or writing software, parenting, or even making a music playlist. There are lots of opportunities to be creative, even for people who don't consider themselves to be particularly creative within the more narrow definition. So this idea of creating more and consuming less kept resurfacing in my brain long after I had read this article. It had hit this nerve with me. So to understand why this might have hit a nerve with me, let me tell you a little bit about my childhood. It would be hard to think of a childhood experience that was more creation-oriented than mine. Let's take a look. I grew up in the outskirts of Winchester, Virginia, a small town geographically close to here but culturally pretty distant. My dad was a psychologist but had a master's degree in mechanical engineering and a penchant for invention. My mom was a teacher but stayed at home after we were born. I have one brother, 2 years younger than I. We lived in a house with one bathroom, built in the 1920s, with an acre of land behind it. First of all, we were a family of passionate hobbyists. This ensured a lot of opportunities to create. When my mom was pregnant with me, she started throwing pots. The only issue was that all of the pots that she made also looked pregnant. Here's one of those pots still in use today. And then she got into basket making. She only stopped when she had a basket around everything in her house that wasn't moving, including things like a deflated basketball that really should have just been thrown away. When I was little, my dad made wine in the basement. This is me in a wine barrel, so he could watch me while he was making wine. My dad decided that he wanted to take up racquetball for exercise, so he built an open-air concrete court in our backyard. I'm pretty sure he also built the giant rotating drum made out of sheet metal that mixed the concrete. He also built 5 to 6 workout machines to assist with doctor-recommended back exercises. They were built out of plywood and fashionably upholstered with a staple gun and blue vinyl, and then prominently displayed in our living room, making it look more than a little like a torture chamber. I didn't really have friends over much. My brother was a skateboarder, so we built a half-pipe in our increasingly crowded backyard. Plus he designed and painted his own boards, jackets, and shirts. This was my princess costume before Disney made billions with the idea. We did Halloween prep for months preceding the actual holiday. I couldn't find photos, but believe me when I tell you that the intricately designed Little Bo Peep costume that my mom sewed out of crepe paper was fantastic. It might have been slightly upstaged by the fact that I brought my actual live goat with me trick-or-treating. My mom was the RA director of our tiny Unitarian church in Winchester. My brother and I were the only regular attendees in the program, but that didn't stop her from making elaborate puppets to illustrate religious history. See if you can spot Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, Zeus, and Martin Luther. Aside from hobbies, our household motto was all about self-sufficiency. Why buy it when you could make it? I don't remember a single vendor ever coming to our house. We did every house and car repair. We assembled and built whatever was needed. To heat our house, my dad made a giant wood stove out of a water heater in an effort to obtain the largest possible surface area. You can see it there in the bottom of the picture. Our house had heat, mind you, but my parents kept it around, set it around 40 degrees, and mostly relied on the wood stove to do the heavy lifting. As a result, the kitchen was usually around 107 degrees and the rest of the house around 45. This is how we used to watch TV, but it doesn't really do it justice. In the winter, we normally wore hats, winter coats, and gloves. The TV was a tiny black and white job with an antenna made out of a coat hanger. We usually took turns standing and holding it for better reception. Our 15-year-old car had a third brake light welded onto the trunk for increased safety. The kids at school used to ask me if it was a rocket booster. I started asking my dad to pick me up around the corner. We had a forge in the basement, which was my dad's design. We were all taught to blacksmith, and we made hooks, tools, handles, and decorative pieces. We made drinking glasses out of glass bottles. We made soap out of chicken lard, which is nauseatingly stinky. I don't recommend it. We wore hand-me-down clothing or sewed them ourselves. We cut each other's hair. We made our own charcoal out of wood, because why buy charcoal when you could make your own? When I asked Dad why we did this, he said somewhat incredulously, to make iron, of course. We had a huge garden, and we canned for the winter months. Many of you who lived on farms can probably relate to this. We raised food for our chickens, ducks, rabbits, pigeons, and goats. We ordered 50 chickens each spring, raised them to adulthood, and then butchered them all in one traumatizing, gory day. Afterwards, we were all vegetarians for at least 3 months before we could open up the freezer and appreciate meat again. Here's a tricky problem for you. What is the best way to take chicken feathers off of a freshly killed chicken? This may possibly be a question that you've never entertained. Well, here's the answer from Wimberley Farm. After cutting off the chicken's head, you soak the chicken, feathers and all, in hot water, and then you use my dad's handy-dandy chicken plucking machine, and the feathers come off like magic. That is a rotating 5-gallon plastic pickle bucket with a bunch of black rubber knobs attached to the outside. It works like a charm. With labor, ingenuity, and incredible penny pinching, we only went to the grocery store once every month. It was like Little House on the Prairie meets Inspector Gadget on an art commune. Suffice it to say, my parents valued creating over consuming. The balance in my family of origin was tipped way over to the creating side. And here's where I can tell you that there is such a thing as too much creating and not enough consuming, and we managed to achieve that during my childhood. The bottom line is, it's impossible to fit into any social group in the conservative town of Winchester, Virginia, if you are spending all of your time making your own charcoal and plucking your own chickens. I spent my adulthood overcompensating by trying to be as conventional and probably not creative as possible, at least on the outside. I live in Vienna, Virginia, a suburb of Washington, D.C., in a 4-bedroom brick colonial. I'm married to a lawyer. I have 2 kids and a small dog and a recent model minivan with the third brake light built right in. But here's the thing. Conventional, modern, middle-class families don't really need to create, do we? Everything's already available to purchase or consume. We can outsource or automate all of our creative activities. So let's think about this for a second. We used to create out of necessity. We needed shelter or tools or clothing. We had to make them. We needed food. We hunted and gathered. Now all of these things are immediately available for us to buy. What's another reason why we used to create? Well, how about creating for good, to make beauty, or to add value, or to enhance understanding? So think about that. Now we can buy or consume our decorations or adornment. We can buy or consume our entertainment, and we can even consume passively knowledge without really engaging in any active way. But, and here's where I've been thinking after reading that article, just because I don't have to create doesn't mean that I shouldn't. Yes, it's more efficient just to purchase. You could use that time saved to do other productive things. And sometimes when you're trying to create something that you know you could just buy, don't you feel sometimes just a little like you're wasting your time? But maybe, just maybe, being creative should be lifted up in our priority list, not because it's productive or efficient, but because it's good for the soul and good for our mental health. Now, based on what I just presented, this sounds daunting, doesn't it? I'm certainly not going back to the way that I lived as a child. Sorry, Mom and Dad. I don't have that kind of desire or energy or, frankly, geographic footprint. But I do think there are ways that I can inject little bits of creativity into my life that will make it more fulfilling and interactive. Don't get me wrong. I'm a big advocate for vegging out and mindlessly consuming at times. Downtime is very important. In addition, there are literally hundreds of things I can think of that I don't want to engage in a creative way, or that I really have no talent for, or both. Here are a couple of examples. When I was about 12, my mom enrolled me in a music composition class. For several hours every day, we were locked into a room with only a piano to let inspiration strike. Well, let's just say I'm still waiting. I think I managed to pull something together by the end of the camp, but it was brutal and never-ending, and a great example of something I should not spend a great deal of creative energy on. Here's another one. I don't really want to be creative about the clothes that I wear every day. I want to look nice. I just don't want to think too much about it. I would either like a stylist to choose all my clothes, or I'd like to adopt a uniform to take thought almost entirely out of that equation. So all of us have things that we don't want to spend our energy on, but there are millions of ways to be creative in life, or based on my new definition, to make connections that are new. And to be honest, I think it actually has more to do with interest and talent. The process of creating is more important than the final product. So for those of you who say, I'm not creative, I can't sing, I can't draw, I will say this. It's true that some have more innate talent than others, but we're not talking here about artistic legacy. We're talking about creating as food for the soul. My favorite example of this comes from my mom again. My mom can't carry a tune in a bucket, but she started teaching herself to sing a couple of years ago using a software program, and she is markedly improved. And more importantly, she loves it, regardless of the quality of the product. For me, I'm going with a three-pronged approach. Number one, I am toning down some of my big areas of mindless consumption. So for me, that is news and online rabbit holes. Number two, I'm not going to stop reading books or watching movies, which I love, but I'm going to add an extra layer of creativity. I've started a small movie discussion group, and I've committed to writing short commentaries on the books that I read. And number three, I'm going to try some new creative pursuits in very short, small doses, like 10 minutes a day of drawing or other forms of visual art. At this church, I know I'm preaching to the choir. Many of you are enormously creative in almost everything that you do. So it may just be an interesting question for you. Where does your consuming versus creating needle fall? Are you happy with where it is? And if not, what could you do to change it? Thanks for listening.